My guest today is Simon Yee, founder of Myosin.xyz, a global network of marketers building marketing tools that accelerate the direct-to-community movement. Simon is what we would call an OG. He started as head of growth at Consensus Mesh in 2020, where he helped grow staple brands like Chainlink and Filecoin. He is the most experienced growth marketer we've ever had on the show. While numbers are a massive part of Simon's expertise, as you can tell from the beginning of the episode, he doesn't hesitate to do some deeper philosophical thinking about the unique value offered by blockchain. LFG, baby. Let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Simon.
Having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. I know Diana Richter introduced us. Her whole community that I have had the pleasure of starting to meet ever since she came on the show has been so pleasant, including you with our pre-recording talk.
I appreciate it.
The typical way that I start these shows is I want my audience to get to know my guests, like who they are, what makes Simon Simon. I call it your founding story. So feel free to start wherever you'd like.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for this platform. It means a lot. I would say that my journey into Web3 actually happened much earlier than I thought it would. And obviously, if you look at my professional background, formally, I joined Web3 as an industry 2 years ago through Consensus Mesh. But I think my journey into cooperative economics, which is the sector within Web3 that I care about and I work in daily, really started in college. My interest in economics was always a thing. And as a young college graduate, I think it was appropriate for me to try out the whole finance management consulting thing, which I did. It's amazing. And I saw myself at a crossroads where, I really didn't fully align with what my experience was, or maybe my expectations, and recognize that I was way more creative, which ended up being a lot of entrepreneurial kind of tendencies. And that's what made me jump from finance and traditional management consulting into something more creative through the lens of social media. So, for the last 12 years, I've been a growth hacker is what people call me. Very quantitative marketer. I leverage the number side of me to paint a story and really just to understand people. And finally decided to apply that thinking towards, I think, which is a giant experiment, which is cooperative economics. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. Yeah.
That's cool. As I describe it, I always say groups of people or collectives with shared values coming together to make group decisions on how to raise and deploy capital. But cooperative economics is a much shorter way to say that.
Well, I'm trying to say DAO, and I think that either I get eyebrows raising like, another DAO guy, or just a complete blank stare. So, this is a third attempt.
Have you put pen to paper on this? Is there like a theory or way that you like to talk about cooperative economics that you want to share?
I'm still borrowing from the best and brightest in the industry, and something that, I think Jess, Steph, and Nicole and a few others on the Seed Club team kind of point to this, which is internet native organizations. My interpretation of that is it is a shared online community with a financial incentive to work together, which makes it serious and creates either a real pain point or a real opportunity, depending on how aligned the online community is, both in structure and in vision. So internet native organization feels a little bit inhumane because it's so descriptive of the technology, but what it unlocks is truly a global community. And I've been able to feel that myself the last, I'd say, 15 months.
Nice. Yeah. So what are some of the, I guess on both sides of the coin, obviously there's some some great things that can be achieved, and I'd love to talk about those. What are some of the pain points that you've seen when communities aren't built the right way or aren't aligned in their values or incentives?
Yeah, totally. I think the easy finger to point at for DAOs, especially given the larger DeFi oriented DAOs, is that it's very difficult to govern with masses. There's just a lot of chaos that ends up happening. For us, we saw that. Blake and I and Sean were fortunate enough to see that early, and really wanted to focus on 150 people or less because of the Dunbar's law, which states that after 150 people, you can't get to know people personally. And given the fact that most of these folks probably won't meet in real life over a long period of time, it's important to build a relationship with a moniker or a PFP. There's still something personal about that. So we kept it intimate for sure. But getting to your question on like, what are some real difficulties in DAOs? I think what I've realized is like, for me as a core operator, I know everybody. I've touched their onboarding process and made myself available. And obviously I'm one of the more vocal people on Discord, Twitter, etc. But my vantage point isn't necessarily the same as someone who's entering the DAO, right? They just see what they interact with. And obviously it's the new kid in town who feels a little bit awkward, potentially may not know where to fit in. Like, what are the clicks here? How do I differentiate myself, et cetera? And I realized that that's a big part of my job and Blake's job, to welcome an environment where people feel comfortable with being themselves. Which is to say, currently we're working on that. We don't have the playbook completely, but we're obviously improving month over month, and our retention rate shows for that. But it is, none of us really know, right? Is how do you run a cooperative globally over the internet and sustain that long-term kind of cooperative game, right?
Yeah. It's super interesting. I mean, I think about, the original, like most proliferated communities in the space were these PFP communities, right? I think maybe before that you would have seen like the Nifty Gateway Discord, but obviously that was a little bit chaotic. I don't think that was ever intended to be like a Nifty Gateway, like communal, like outpouring. Yeah. But when you started to see the PFP communities, there was a lot of financialized discussions, right? Obviously, because when number go up, people get excited. But you also saw kind of the vulnerable side in some of the communities where people would kind of talk about their days, and like other community members would kind of pick them up. Now that has matured quite a bit, as you see companies like, or communities like Myosin, like Jump, like Safari, like these communities that are built around like a common professional values in a way, like, or a common professional goal. And then you see communities like Zen Academy, where it's kind of like, it's massive. It's obviously way past Dunbar's number, but there's like little pockets that you can go and kind of assert yourself in, which kind of gives everybody their ability to kind of build their identity. But that, all of that to say, when you first get in there, that's a great analogy to think about, is like, you're the new kid at school. And like, so there's an introduce yourself channel, and some of the more advanced communities like yours might say, we actually want to interview you and talk to you before you get in. But the next steps to keep people engaged are the big mystery now, because once the honeymoon phase is over of like, I'm so excited to be here. Hey, everybody, you're so interested in me because I'm new. Then it's like, okay, where do I settle in, and how do I settle in a way? I mean, just personalizing it a little bit. Like, I've never been able to clearly communicate on Discord as much as I can like this. Right. Yeah. You hop on the first thing I do, I'm like, hop on a video call, like, Web3 video call.
Cameras off. Cameras off.
Cameras off. I mean, I've only had one anonymous guest so far, but it's an interesting thing, because there is that core tenet of pseudonymity, anonymity, but how do you truly build connections that way? I think there's two sides of it. One is, without knowing what a person looks like, what they sound like, and where they live, then there's no biases that you immediately put up, whether you know it or not, unconscious, conscious biases,
Totally.
which makes meeting in person particularly special.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like it's a euphoric feeling for
it
sure.
is to go and hug somebody that you've had multiple conversations with, uh, purely on typing sometimes, and then to be like, "You're, this person, right, or this pseudonym," and you're like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
just big hug." That was the
Yeah.
feeling I got at NFT NYC last year, at least.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Well, I guess you're kind of learning as you go. What are kind of
Yeah.
your methods for learning? Do you guys just have kind of like communal recaps as you go along? Obviously you're a numbers guy. You're probably looking at some sort of retention metrics and stuff like that. What is the other kind of stuff that helps you learn?
Yeah, for sure. The core team really looks at, I would say, three main things, which is, how engaged are members into individual guilds. And I'm happy to boast that about 80% of the members who enter, the community is small, it's 60 people, but 80% of the 60% participate in some sort of skills-based guild, which makes the onboarding experience, it's kind of like a homeroom.
Hmm.
It's 4 or 5 people, maybe 6 people instead of 60.
Yeah.
So that's good. Obviously, the size of where we're at is helpful for retention rate, right? We'd have a much different problem if our retention rate's 90% on 60 people. Like that's just like not community market fit. Um, I'd say the second piece is making sure, as a commercial service cooperative, right? This is not a philosophical experiment. It is a operating for-profit business. We want to make sure that every member is paid, and as much as possible paid evenly. Um, and there's as much of a transparent, decentralized process for, um, you know, getting staffed on projects. But I think more importantly, selecting the projects that people want to opt into, because that's a big thing that's missing currently with agency life. Is that you're kind of told what to do, and you may not actually be jazzed about the brand that you're supporting, which is like the recipe for poor work, I would say. And then, last but not least, as a DAO, we set our sights on decentralizing to other co-members, or I'm sorry, other co-owners. And it obviously starts with the founders. And we have six other members in the governance guild, but that needs to either rotate out or have some different checks and balances over time. So that's more of a feeler. It's less of a number, but we're very cognizant of kind of our birth ground and kind of the why behind all this stuff. And it's a, you know, it's a process for sure.
It sounds like it. I mean, I think quantitative data is what speaks to numbers the most, and ROI and things like that. But there is a qualitative aspect. Now, luckily, from a qualitative standpoint, you can operate with much lower initial participants, right? You can get statistically significant data with maybe 5, 10 participants.
Yeah.
So that's great. So it sounds like you're taking that into account. It's like, all right, guys, how are you feeling? Just tell me a little bit about what you think here. Just gathering more of the raw feedback rather than the how many times have you checked into the guild? How much have you actually
Yeah.
typed in Discord and that kind of stuff?
I'd say the big thing actually worth mentioning is that once a member is working on a client project, there's two forms of, I'd say, feedback that other members are giving.
Okay.
Every month we use a coordinate vote, which is about a 20% bonus that a member is eligible for each month. And the way that coordinate votes are worked, it's, let's say you, me, and a third person each have 100 give token. We just allocate for ourselves and other people. And it's just like a straight percentage off of 300 give tokens. And so we've seen some initial, uncomfortable conversations become coaching or frank discussions around the way that we work. And then at the end of the project, there's an NPS that basically asks, like, would you work with this member again? And so based on those data points, we're able to identify, hey, like, this kind of person is an expert at what they do, but not the best for client projects. How do we kind of deputize them. Or it could be as simple as like, hey, wrong intentions here or different intentions doesn't fit our community. We need to sunset this on a day-to-day relationship. So yeah, it's important to keep the temperature check and obviously make sure that everyone has an input into who is part of the community.
I just see this, like, as you grow, I see this kind of beautiful dot matrix filling out, like almost like I don't know if you follow like Ray Dalio and the Bridgewater, what they do over there in terms of like just completely open and honest discourse, videotaping every meeting, everybody rating you as you go. I think to some that might not work, but I don't know. When you talk, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, totally. Radical transparency. I think there's still, we're people and we're more emotional than we are rational. So I think there are some parts of Ray Dalio's point of view that's a little bit, it's just awkward. I don't know how to describe it, but I think being transparent about the right things I think cultivating that sense of community is important. So for us, like, you want to praise publicly within the community, but not necessarily give critical feedback publicly. Like, that's never fun. And you create a hostile environment. And I think that's where somewhere like a Bridgewater may fail, is that they don't think about the human emotional aspect of things. Luckily, we're marketers, so we have that feeler
Yeah,
and
I
that
was going to
temperature.
say marketers versus investors.
Yeah, exactly. We're like a hedge fund, but we feel for a living, and then we help you sell stuff.
There you go.
So yeah, I think we have an advantage there as far as like making sure the temperature check is there.
I just realized we have gone on this tangent of describing your inner workings and your philosophies, but you haven't given the audience kind of like the overview. Let's take a step back. Let's talk about the Myosin stack, if you will,
Yeah, totally.
what it was born out of, and then where you are right now. And that might give people some context as to like all this other stuff that you're illuminating.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I joined Consensus Mesh, which is the largest accelerator and incubator in Ethereum, about 2 years ago. Was lucky enough to work along my colleagues, Sean, Prashant, and of course Gabriel Anderson. And we advised about 40 startups across the entire landscape: DAO tooling, NFT platforms, emerging use cases for different technology like Chainlink and for Filecoin. And I think the thing that stuck out for me from that experience was, um, what does a public ledger actually enable as far as trust? The initial kind of use cases have been circling around internet money and how to replicate this way of like earning an income online. I guess like digitally, I guess. But the thing that stuck out for me is like, as a former agency owner, as someone who's worked at very different startups as far as operating models, I was like, wait a second, that transparency is what a lot of people about my age really want, which is how is the company doing? What does the balance sheet look like? Um, Sometimes even like who gets paid what, which creates kind of important, equitable related questions to be answered. And that's what a public blockchain does, right? If you look at our community treasury, there's about 150K sitting in there right now. And members see how we spend our money, including how we earn it, and then also how we allocate for members, and then ultimately spend it. So for us, that builds a lot of trust, I think, and brings a more long-term view to who decides to join and sees the vision and buys into that mission of Myosin. And so far, we've been right on that hypothesis.
That's awesome. So you saw the ability for the blockchain to meet what you would consider a need, a point of friction in the agency world. And so you say, I'm going to start a decentralized agency service provider. What are the next steps?
I think the first thing that Blake and I did was get to a point of minimum viable community. So in order to get there, you have to articulate what are your mission, vision, values. how do you get that message out, et cetera. So that was the white paper that I wrote, and Blake and Sean helped edit, the three co-founders, and then we went to market with it. And what we found is that there were a lot of people who were interested, but the quality wasn't necessarily there. So we had to establish a quality control and then onboarding process and all these things. But at the core of it is just finding like-minded co-owners who are able to operate at the caliber that we want to operate in, which is the top 2% of marketers in the world. I'd say this is kudos to Blake, my co-founder. But early on, he was kind of talking about villages and towns, and then kind of the reason for tapping back into that. And so our villages are villages of skills, and there's 10 different skills-based guilds. Growth is one, product is another, content, design, kind of community, right? And these are all allowing experts to share information, right? That could be playbooks, tools, latest and greatest, but it also allows us to be more decentralized in the way that we operate.
Okay, so you're a growth marketer.
Yeah,
I don't know Blake's background, but let's assume he's a growth marketer for purposes of the question. But
yeah,
you aren't just offering growth marketing services to your clients. You're offering, design, creative, like all the maybe brand strategy, that kind of stuff. How
yeah.
did you curate the community in a way so that you could find the diversity of experience to offer what would be
Yeah.
like a full suite of products as like a proper decentralized agency?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really just like feedback from what the market wanted. Initially, especially during the bull market, a lot of folks wanted brand identity work, establishing a community, building a social media presence. And I think that's a reflection of the influx of capital, influx of ideas, a lot of optimism, almost like too much optimism coming into the space. And then now in the bear market, a lot of the requests are like demand generation, growth hacking, paid marketing, really kind of in the weeds. How do you grow a grassroots community? And so, ultimately, we ebb and flow with the market, and kind of meet the needs of the folks in crypto.
So are you, I guess, at this point, are you going out and finding people, or are people finding you? Like, is it more inbound or outbound in terms
Yeah,
of like growing my?
yeah. Luckily, most of our applicants are referred. We've
Mhm.
kind of established that culture and the quality of who we're looking for, and then great talented people know other great and talented people. So yeah, that's typically how we find our new members. But initially, it was hard. We had a ton of people apply, and unfortunately, we weren't able to select everybody. So
Yeah, I guess, yeah, having to tell people no is one of the hardest things to do, right? Because they may be just talented, but there's just someone who's one notch above or something that they're doing specifically. Have you ever actually like told someone no and then had them come back and been able to join as you guys grew? Is that
yeah,
so you keep
yeah,
those relationships? That's great.
yeah, totally. I think it's not skills aren't necessarily like a sedentary thing, or kind of a set number. It's really a measurement in time. And so I think it's important to really in any interview situation, but especially for Myosin, like get down to the intentions of that person, right? Why do you want to join? We're definitely not a talent marketplace. So if you're expecting a quick freelance gig, this is just a terrible fit for you. But if you're trying to join a community of co-owners, very, very different. And I would say there's a fair amount of patience and grace there, to allow someone to grow in a safe environment with peers,
Mhm.
versus kind of a much more cutthroat environment of like, you didn't meet this number and off you go. You're just a 1099 employee. And by the way, we don't owe you anything. So we're not that cutthroat in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's more like a positive sum game. Like if you succeed, we succeed, as opposed to the zero sum game of I'm the owner. If you don't help me succeed, you're out.
Yeah, that's right. And I think a lot about this book. I forget the name of the author, but he wrote this book called Infinite, Finite and Infinite Games, and it really gets at like do you want to win the 2023 NBA championships, or do you love the game of basketball? And I think the folks who really care about the game of cooperative economics stay. The folks who care about like earning a living this month tend not to feel that this is the right fit for them.
So do you find that like a lot of your community members are in other communities as well? And so they're just kind of like a professional contributor in that sense?
Yeah, I'd say professional hustler. There's a certain degree of people, certain type of person who's satisfied with their 9 to 5, but still are unsatisfied with searching for more, like seeking more community or knowledge, or just contribute more. And these are the types of people who join. Some people are full time at places, and other people are career freelancers or solopreneurs. And then other people are just DAO contributors. And we welcome all of that.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I guess you're the personas of the professionals working in this space are still kind of forming, right? I think we
Totally.
have words for them, but like these labels can be limiting. There's a lot more to unpack there. What have you
Totally.
kind of learned from when you first started in terms of the persona breakdown? And it sounds like you started right around the euphoria level phase, maybe, versus now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say during WAGMI culture, it's very difficult to see why someone's bullish on something. But in a bear market, you pretty quickly tell why people stay. Um, and luckily, I was able to participate in MCon, which is Metacartel's DAO conference. And that was really the first purview into realizing that there's deep philosophies of why people operate DAOs. And they could be diametrically opposed. Um, and so, for me, just being able to have a frank and honest conversation with someone who doesn't necessarily see the same view as me, right? Someone could be anarchist, libertarian, socialist, capitalist, post late stage capitalist, socialist, right? And everything in between. Everyone has their own flavor for why they are in Web3. So yeah, I think more succinctly, everyone's here because they think there's a better way, but what that better way is contingent upon what they believe in. And so, yeah, that's what I've noticed for sure, and especially in the DAO space because it's a little bit more utopian than the other ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's something that I talk about a lot on the show. It's just like, what is the right way? I think, my theory is that the right way is for as many people as possible to take advantage of the incentive alignment and ability to use the blockchain to build a better world. But then there's also people that think that the only way you can do that is by decentralizing everything and
Totally.
recreating the whole world. And like, look, they're entitled to their opinions. I think the important thing that we need to facilitate is not to demonize anyone's opinion, as long
Totally.
as it's well thought out. How
Yeah.
are you going about having those different conversations? Is that something you're participating in actively?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, Definitely plugged into more DAO operators and kind of comparing and contrasting what they're learning because I think we're all learning in the bleeding edge. But I think um, the thing that as a foundational first principles thing that I try to remind myself is, does this problem need decentralization as a solution? So, for example, let's use the problem of traffic, like car traffic congestion versus city planning. If you use a centralized method of tracking traffic, you have a situation like the radio helicopter, 1010 wins news type things, which there's one view and they're giving you a snapshot in time of what's stuck. But in 10 minutes time, that's like defunct information. You have something like Waze, and all of a sudden everyone's giving real-time feedback. It's constantly evolving and moving. That addresses the problem of congestion, right? Same thought for, different thought. Imagine urban planning. In a decentralized method of solving that solution, everyone's building a road to their own house. And eventually the whole earth is paved, right? It's like, oh, I need my road to the bathroom, my road to Walmart has to be direct. It cannot be any turns. Right. This is the most decentralized way to build a road is my convenience, right? And then you have a more, I would say, efficient method of having people organize, on a town square, which is there's a committee and everyone's different, has different views, an economist, a politician, finance person, right, community organizer, and they all say like, oh, how do we fit it within the broader grid and have people, there's more control and I think more speed with a centralized way to solve a problem.
Yeah, so you have to, I guess, to summarize there is certain stuff that's better off centralized.
Totally. We're
It is,
operating a business.
yeah,
We can't necessarily, sorry to cut you off. We can't necessarily leave everything up for direct democracy votes. It would just slow us down incredibly. And we work in a competitive environment where speed kills. Um, but when it comes to things like surfacing the best strategies or tactics or emerging trends, decentralization is a huge advantage. What most people see with Discord or with Myosin is like, oh, you're just chatting online on some app that kids use as gamers. What's really happening is we have 23 countries represented from 60 experts around the world, and everyone's sharing information every day, and they all have a shared financial incentive, so they're telling the truth. Like no one's trying to put one on someone else.
right.
It's an incredibly powerful thing. And it's no different than Waze, but it's marketing information.
I love that. It's like the incentives are aligned here. The I guess intentions of the community have been vetted in a way that allows everybody to keep coming back for the right reasons.
Totally. Totally.
So what about like there's other decentralized service organizations that I've encountered, like Vector DAO and stuff like that. I know you guys operate a little differently than they operate. Is there any differences that you want to point out that are unique to Myosin and or that you may still be developing?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Myosin is different from a pure play service DAO in the sense that we are productizing our services. We have an advantage as moon explorers or Mars explorers, where we're going to be able to figure out what tools we need on Mars, right? And so as we become the pioneers who can share the best and brightest strategies of exploring Web3, we have an unfair advantage to build the products. And so our vision is to use our community treasury to fund a marketing tool suite that anybody can use to accelerate the direct community movement.
Interesting.
And by doing that, we're building things like, imagine a HubSpot, but what is the Web3 version of HubSpot? Well, you probably have airdrops, you have allow lists, you have bounty-based systems, you've got affiliate networks on chain, you have a different kind of analytics tool stack. It's very, very confusing for a Web2 marketer to enter Web3. And I'd say that's the biggest impediment to bringing more people to Web3 is the marketers are responsible for bringing people in. But if the tools suck, you just have a sandwich board outside Times Square. It just doesn't work. So
That's interesting. Wow. So, okay. So we take for the audience, if you don't know what HubSpot is marketing automation, but has been expanded into many different categories, including sales and stuff like that. They've kind of maintained a internal ecosystem, whereas, some other more specialized tools like Marketo or something like that is just marketing automation. I would call them like maybe the Apple of that SaaS part of the community.
yeah,
That kind of develop that side. And so what you're saying is that you basically, and I share this opinion, by the way, you take what someone's already doing, right? And then you augment it in a way that allows them to understand what Web3 can offer, right? So you think like, okay, there's unique ways, but then there's also ways that you can break it down to like POAPs and airdrops and like all these things that help that marketer do their job better. So how do you make that a familiar experience? So you actually have the resources internally and the treasury to incentivize people to help you build solutions based on what you're learning in real time and your experience before Web3.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
At first we built this scavenger hunt NFT tool basically as a fun little experiment to see if we can play around with email acquisition for NFTs. And what we've learned throughout our alpha tests is that this is the primitive for collecting Web 2.5 data, right? You've got on-chain things like wallet IDs, but then you have
Hmm.
off-chain things that marketers are like comfortable with it, which is an email address, a phone number, IDFA, right? Like CID. There's like millions of Web2 hooks, and I think the ability to bring normies into Web3 is easing that burden into the wallet based world. But it'll take Web2 hooks to get there, and so that's kind of the bridge that we're playing in. Is how do you enable marketers who don't fully understand Web3 stuff to use what they're familiar with, emails, messaging, hooks into ad tech, etc., but do it in a way that introduces Web3 that's like fair, equitable, fun, and rewarding for a consumer.
Yeah, I think about like the silo breakdowns, right? That a lot of these SaaS platforms, like as I sold Marketo for like 3 or 4 years. So like,
Great
I
product.
understand. What's that?
Great product. It's a great
It
product.
is. It's really great. It was really easy to sell because it's like it made sense, right? Like, hey, meet your customers where they are based on what they're interested in, what they've looked at, how they've engaged, what they've done before. Like, here's some more relevant content. Let's make you a better marketer,
Totally.
right? And by the way, you can do this for all your customers too, because we just used our own solution to sell to you,
Exactly.
which is kind of. I mean, so if you take that to Web3, it's like, all right, you have this personal information, you have how this person engages with our website, all this stuff, but then you add a level of intent data of like what are they actually purchasing, and taking the extra step. Maybe what POAPs do they have in their wallet,
Yeah.
and you have an even clearer picture. It actually like puts them in a better position, I guess. Do you build the solution as a standalone and build the integrations through APIs to the existing marketing solutions, or are you picturing a world where this is the new standalone solution, or maybe you don't know
That's
yet?
yeah, that's a great question. The frank and honest truth is we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We're focused on largely the microservices that are the touch points with the consumer first. And so we're looking at a browser-based app. We're looking at hyper targeted local, geofenced app like Blackbeard. We're looking at Discord, some more like everyday customer engagement touch points like Discord bots. And so we're just trying to figure out like where are the biggest pain points for marketers and how do we stitch a user profile together that either is deployed into Web 2 or Web 3. But we'll see.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So let's take a step back again. I have not given your kind of experience of the overall market any highlight yet. I love to hear just, from you were early into the space for all intents and purposes. What are your big observations in terms of community and all of the other promises that Web3 has? And where are you now? Where do you think we can start filling more gaps? Where are you seeing the biggest pain points to this kind of mainstream adoption that we're all kind of working towards?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is more symptomatic of the bull market, but it was relatively easy to build a community focused on financial incentives. But in a bear market, it turned into, like you were saying earlier, when mint or when number go up community, and that's not any different than I would say in a way with the way that Web 2 operates with direct to consumer. It's like almighty profit for the sake of it. Um, and the communities that last now through the bear and also the bull is like really tapping into this more tribal sense of community where it's a deep connection with people on a shared vision, and the financial upside happens to be one of the benefits. It's really the social sense of belonging on a global scale that I think makes the best communities thrive.
So it's how are you? I mean, I guess how are we addressing that social? like aspect of it. I mean, there are impact DAOs, there are public goods DAOs. What are some of the ways that you've seen that be addressed? Because I'm 100%, I'm with you. I think, that's why I'm here, right? Because I see that ability for people to express themselves and be more socially conscious, but also make a living, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the best shining example is Gitcoin, right? They've given so many grants based on social initiatives. Plus, those social initiatives don't have to be inherently nonprofit oriented. I'll give an example. Superfest, which is a decentralized music festival community, it's made up of musicians, event organizers, etc. They're looking at ways to involve the community to build an IP like a Coachella. And so it's just community led. It's not necessarily social impact led, although I'm sure, social impact oriented DAOs would do quite well with this Web3 structure.
Yeah, I mean, you do see that. You see stuff like Linkstyle too. Like there's no
Sure.
social impact to buying a golf course. It's just a bunch of people who are super passionate about golf that are
Yeah.
like, hey, it'd be really cool to own a golf course. And I don't mind paying X number for this NFT that'll give me a right to be a member at this golf course. And
Yeah.
they just did it, right? Like
Yeah,
they
exactly.
bought a golf course in Scotland.
Crazy. I mean, it seemed like they bought it for a pretty cheap price compared to what they raised during the bull. Do you know if they're buying another course? I don't know
I
if you
don't know.
remember.
No, I talked to my guest a couple weeks ago when we released this. That was his onboarding into Web3. I think a
What's
lot
that?
of people were onboarded. Like a lot of my friends were like, "Hey, I don't know much about Web3, but I love golf. Did you hear about Linkstyle?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not joining, but if you like golf, go for it."
Yeah, totally, 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 totally. Very cool.
Same idea with Kraus House, right? Like a lot of
Yeah,
NBA fans out there. I know I have friends that are in agency world, do brand work, stuff like that, and haven't necessarily bought into the idea of owning a piece of digital art or joining a PFP community, but they're huge NBA fans. So when they see this collective going out there and like they're making real strides towards buying a minority interest in an NBA team, you
crazy.
you see the magic.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what makes us like I think stay in the industry is like literally we're disrupting ways that people work together.
Yeah, it's like the great flattening is what I call it sometimes, where
Mhm.
you're kind of letting the true beliefs of people and the true values of people have their moment in the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sure from a how a worker bee feels or middle management feels, but I almost feel like it's like I don't know what you call these things. They're like tetrahedrons or something. Remember chemistry class? They have like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
triangles, but multi-dimensional.
yeah.
No one's necessarily above one another, but you still need a core. So it's
Hmm.
almost like centric circles or spheres, you
Hmm.
know, or layers of a cake. So yeah, it's a different feel for sure.
It is, the more I think about it, I think about like these kind of grandiose ideas that eventually we just kind of reorganize the way that people interact with each other, and I don't think that necessarily means that the way we're doing it now is the wrong way, right? I think
Yeah.
there's just a lot of ways we can improve. I in fact, when I teach Web3 to people, I use the picture of when Will Smith came on stage and hit Chris Rock. Uh, and I'm like, look, like Chris Rock got up. He's web 2, right? Or non-web 3, if you want to expand it a little bit,
Yeah.
right? But sometimes you need a nice sock in the face, figuratively, ideally,
Yeah.
to actually like get up and realize, okay, maybe I need to switch it up a little bit and
Totally.
think about how I can kind of better myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like again, it's equanimity for the sake of it is great, but is it solving the right problem? Like, does that problem need to be addressed with decentralization? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of DAOs haven't thought of that earnestly enough.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the big question is like, what is the real use case was a hot topic 6 months ago and probably now still too.
Yeah.
But more so like people have to be incentivized to participate. And some people are okay being incentivized just by virtue of the social connection, but some people aren't. And
Yeah.
that's not a problem. Now, should it rise to the level of when number go up? No, right? Like when moon? No. But like in your instance, you're paying people to work, right?
Right.
And they have a co-owner mentality in terms of how well they work, what projects they pick up, and what they do. Like,
Mhm.
so you have to kind of like it, even like I think we talk a lot about meeting people where they are in terms of onboarding new people, but also keeping people around,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Totally.
Yeah, yeah. I see a lot of people that they get burnt out. They come in, they join 50 discords. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in all
It's
that information.
it's confusing. Like words like wallet is indoctrinated as one thing, but when you first hear about wallet as a normie, it's like, what do you mean my wallet? That's such a sensitive item on my that's an everyday thing that I carry, and no one asks me for my wallet, right? They
Yeah.
ask for credit card or payment information. Why are we calling it a wallet? That's just so scary, you know?
I love that. The wallet brings up another interesting point around breaking down silos, though. So, like, regardless of what you call it, the ability to plug a wallet into multiple websites, allow that wallet to, or allow that website to see what you have in your wallet, brings a whole new, like, holistic picture of who that person is.
Totally. Just call it
Have
a
you?
safe. Call it a
Yeah,
safe. It's a digital asset, you know?
yeah, yeah. Or you could just call it a login.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
In this case.
Yeah. So good. So good.
Are you when you're working with your clients, are you encountering any of the terminology changes that you need to make and stuff like that? Like how do you go about
Yeah, we're a Web 2.5 agency where we're both working with Web 2 traditional agencies like or brands like Shiseido, and then we also work with Web 3 native organizations like DAOs that are in the Solana space, and so we play everything in between. So the Web 3 natives don't necessarily need a glossary list, whereas the clients are need a little bit of handholding, but that's why we're here.
what are some of the big pain points that you see on both sides on each of them?
Yeah, I think on the Web3 side, it's constantly battling this idea of feature bloat. A lot of technical people are in love with the keys that they're building, but they don't realize that consumers need doors to unlock. And so if the consumer doesn't want to enter that room, they don't really care about the key, special key. It's a cleaner key, it's more efficient, it's made out of brass. Like I don't care, right? And so that's educating on a product positioning, consumer psychology level. Whereas in the Web 2 side, they've largely figured that out, and that's why they're giants in their industry. But it's a very different way of working. And think about, let's say, um, CNN or Time Warner, and telling them, "Hey, social media is going to be this thing." Like, what do you mean? I own like 90% of the cable network and TV. Imagine trying to convince them that like digital profiles from around the world and these things called influencers will end up on your TV screen because it's driving the news. It's that kind of philosophical realignment of what technology is bringing.
So it's really like disruption insurance, kind of
Yeah,
for
yeah, exactly. Exactly. A lot of our clients are in the digital innovation department or emerging tech. And they're like, okay, well, we have our legacy business, but this thing has the potential to completely upend how we work. Let's get a little closer. And so we help with that.
That's awesome. So what other, I guess, general technologies are you or shifts are you seeing at the level of what social media has done?
Yeah, there are some notable case studies that have happened the last 6 months or so. The one that I always point to is FWB partnered with, I think it was Remy Martin or Hennessy, over last year's Art Basel. And basically, what they did is instead of hiring an agency, they hired FWB, and FWB and this liquor brand sold membership tickets to a luxury Web3 club, and their first event happened to be at Art Basel. Well, the notable thing is, instead of one company paying the other, there was a token rev share.
Hmm.
So 34% of the NFTs that were sold were automatically sent over to FWB's community treasury. So it's like a very different view of how a brand can activate a community, because if the community has a shared upside, they also have kind of a shared voice in the table, which is, I think, different from, I think, some how some services work.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's like automating partnerships using smart contracts and blockchain technology. But like before that could even happen, there's the foresight that FWB is a thriving community. It's one of the earliest communities
Totally.
out there. And there wasn't a whole lot of structure other than being intentional, being referred, being interviewed when you came in.
Yeah.
It's really thriving. Are you a member of Friends with Benefits?
I am a city member, not a global member.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. I've had some friends that have gone in there and been able to generate some business, right? Just by virtue of meeting people through there. And I think that's the big picture. The question is, how many can we have, right? I hope that there's a ton,
Yeah.
but I don't know how many times that's been repeated.
Yeah, I think it's, it really, I do think that smaller communities probably will operate more effectively. It's just how people work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about Web2 analogies. So, in New York, you've got these huge mom communities, which are
Mm-hmm.
largely oriented towards personalities like influencers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you have smaller Facebook groups or IG groups that are by neighborhood. You have Upper East Side moms, Tribeca moms, Brooklyn moms by neighborhood.
Jewish
And
moms
it's,
of Atlanta.
yeah, it's like Atlanta, very specific kind of recipe that needs to be shared, on Shabbat. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, having that level of specificity, I think, is important, because that really unlocks community quickly.
Is there, just brought up a really interesting point? Is there anybody trying to enable these localized Facebook groups to leverage Web3 technology to actually like make stuff happen together?
That's a great question. I don't know of any, but that's a huge opportunity. That's an
Yeah.
enormous opportunity.
Maybe we cut this part out of the show and go build it.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Because you got to
That is
think they've already got the mindset, they've got the shared values, they've all met each other in there. Look, is there a curation issue? Maybe sometimes, but that's why there's curators, right? Like my wife is in charge of our neighborhood's called Old Fourth Ward. Like she's in charge of that, and if someone comes in trying to post some, I don't think I'd call it shilling in this sense, but something to the equivalent of shilling about something, she's like, no, it's not good. It's not going to happen. That
yeah,
doesn't
not
help the
cool.
community get stronger.
Right.
Hmm. Hmm. That is very interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Well, this has been awesome, man. We're nearing the top of the hour, and I wanted to ask you my two traditional closing questions.
Go for
Uh,
it.
the, the first one is, how do you describe Web3?
Man, that's a tough one. Um, yeah, it's read, write, own, right? You go from participating, uh, not only reading the content online, to now contributing content as a social media person, to now beginning to reorient websites and apps that you use that have more of an upside for you as an owner of your data or owner of your assets, or owner of a shared piece of a community. So that just like with social media, it changes the way that the internet is organized.
I'm going to ask a question I don't usually ask after this, but I'm interested.
Yeah, go for it.
What does the term or world of Web3 look like if it succeeds in your mind?
Network states,
Yeah,
right?
big.
If you read like Balaji's thing, yeah, it's like, sure, I live in the United States, but I really resonate with people who live in suburban environments in tier one cities that have access to culture, right? So it doesn't necessarily have geographic borders, it's just cultural borders or it's interest-based borders. And then you have this sub-community that's not necessarily bound by space or time.
I love that. I love that. The last question is forward-looking, which kind of relates to what you were just talking about. Is, you know, in the future 6 to 12 months, where do you see yourself and this space? And then 5 to 10 years, where do you see yourself in the space?
That's a great question. I'd say 6 to 12 months, we'll have minted our first on-chain reputation score. We've been very careful about doing that since obviously want to promote good behavior and not necessarily ostracize bad behavior. So that'll be really exciting and unlock the next phase of growth for Myosin. I'd say 4 to 5 years from now, I want to write a book about this experience. And I'm starting to look for books to read, to be inspired and watch out for potential pitfalls. And it's phone conversations, it's no books. So I think there's a big opportunity to share the knowledge of what I've accumulated into something that other people can read.
I'll read that book.
Cool. Awesome.
That sounds awesome, man. Well, Simon, thank you so much for coming on. I've enjoyed this whole conversation and look forward to building with you, man. I'm happy to connect all the time in the future. So
appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.